Hey guys! The last book I read in June was one that I read for the Around the World BookTube Buddies challenge, and that was We the Drowned by Carsten Jensen. This is a book I've been talking about for quite some time, about wanting to read it, about how I'm reading it, and stuff like that, so I figured I would do a review. It seemed like the logical conclusion. We the Drowned is a story kind of about a city, about the city Marstal in Denmark. And Marstal is supposed to be a big sailing city. It's actually a real city in Denmark. I don't know how true to life this story is. It follows a family called the Madsens. First the father Lorid, and then the son Albert, and then Albert's kind of grandson Knud Erik. As they kind of journey with this town through time from the beginning of the age of sailing and its real heyday into World War II and the advent of the steamship and its increased popularity. It talks a lot about the life of sailors and also what it's like to be their family members at home. Lorid, the first character, is very interesting. He's a man who was kind of this great sailor, and then something happened and he's kind of snapped. He had this really close brush with death and was never the same man afterwards. His son Albert, by and large, grew up without him, as most children of sailors at the time did. His father was at sea for the large majority of his childhood. And Albert, in a lot of ways, Albert just wanted to not be his father. He loved the sea, he loved sailing, but he didn't want to be somebody who was letting other people down the way he felt his father let him down. And so he becomes this very powerful, broad-chested, bearded sailor, and kind of leaves family life to the people who want to stay on land. And it's a big part of the story is about him getting to that conclusion and becoming this older man and realizing that he wishes he had had a family. He wishes that he had had children, and even if he had left them behind to go sailing on occasion, that there was something kind of sad in his life because he didn't have that family experience. Eventually he kind of comes through this kind of crazy story. He comes to, in a sense, almost adopt a young boy named Knud Erik. And Knud Erik is kind of the last of the generation of sailors on the island who really would have sailed any kind of sail ship as opposed to like a steamer or an iron ship. And throughout the three generations, you really see how very difficult it was to grow up in a sailing town. People are, kind of hard by necessity because they're losing people left and right. There's a chaos about it. There are really only women who can be depended on to stay home and to do what's right, and often they're kind of left with this sense of, I wouldn't say abandonment, but lack of closure is I think the right term. There's this lack of closure when the men don't come home because they've died at sea. There's a lack of closure when they're gone and you don't know if they're coming back, and when they've come back and they seem different because they've been gone for 2 years. And there's a really interesting dynamic at play. Jensen keeps coming back to this idea that, people are saying that the women aren't strong enough, but they're the strong ones because they're the ones who stay behind and have all of this responsibility on their shoulders. This is a 600-page book. I really, really liked the first 3/4 of it. Albert is the main character for by far the majority of the story, and I thought he was really interesting. He was likable. He was relatable. He was somebody who I could see growing up in that time and becoming the way he was. The rest of the story for me, I just didn't feel as connected to the characters. It wasn't that I didn't like them or that I didn't think their stories were as, as interesting. Simply that I really liked Albert. um, there is a good chunk of the story that takes place during World War II and talks about how sailors from Denmark kind of became entangled in the war despite the fact that Denmark was a neutral country. And the way that they were treated by people who would either assume that Denmark as a country was for one side or another, which was interesting to read about. Overall, I felt this was a very enjoyable story. It's a little bit slow paced, but there's something very almost fairy tale like about it. I know that's probably an odd descriptor, but it has that kind of, tall tale sailor story. There's a lot of almost magical realism. What I would describe as magical realism is perhaps on the borderline of that. By and large, I think when I was reading this, I kept thinking this is what I wished 100 Days of Solitude had been. I really had wanted to like 100 Years of Solitude, that kind of multi-generational magical realist story, and I think for me, this checked a lot of boxes that just didn't. Overall, I think I gave this a 3.5 out of 5, which is a pretty good score. I would recommend this to somebody who'd be interested, one, in learning about sailing. It isn't overwhelming or overly informative about sailing, but I felt like I was learning. And also, like I said, I thought it was a really interesting character-driven story. If you have read We the Drowned, I'd love to know what you think. And I hope you're having a fantastic reading week. I'll talk to you later. Bye.